do any of that nonsense where on IG it doesn't work. Gotta make sure this is muted before I continue. It worked the last couple times. Alright, the audio's working. Alright, I'm gonna go live. Alright. So I guess we can start. I guess the first one will of course be was it preterism. We can definitely put that in the what is it called? I guess we could put an F tier. I just noticed this one only has T. D. So I guess I'll put it in the lowest. So why this preterism doesn't work? Can you explain to the audience what it is and how it can actually function within the Bible?
Sure. So the reason, so what is preterism? That's the question.
Mm-hmm.
Preterism means pre, and so when you're talking about pre, you're talking about in the past. And essentially, hopefully, all my preterists in the audience can, confirm this. But it's the belief that all past events, well, all events that we think are in the future, like the return of Christ, the kingdom, resurrection, these things already happened in the past. We are currently living in the eternal state, and the new heavens and new earth is either a spiritual reality or that or it's a reality that exists, on this plane right here and now and stuff like that. So it depends on which framework you hold. But all preterists essentially believe that these events took place at around 70 AD with the storming and destruction of Jerusalem under Titus Flavius V. And so essentially, whatever objection you bring to preterism, whatever event you bring to preterism, whatever sort of text you bring to preterism to say, hey, this didn't happen, or this couldn't have happened, or no, this, I can't see this, or whatever, they'll always frame it within that context because they interpret Jesus's words in this generation as saying within this 40-year time period of when I spoke, something like that. So if that's not accurate to preterism, someone tell me. But that is essentially what preterism is. So now, why can't it work? Well, it can't work for basically all the reasons I listed. Because whenever you bring up a text, right, that says, hey, this couldn't have happened. Hey, Romans 8:11, that's a physical resurrection. Hey, Hebrews chapter 2, verse 8, it says we do not yet see all things under his feet. Hey, Revelation 19, Jesus didn't slaughter his enemy. Hey, 2 Thessalonians 1, he didn't destroy all unbelievers. Hey, new heavens and new earth is in here, Revelation 21 and 22. It's onward and on. There's many, many, many things that couldn't have happened. Even minute things like the beast and the Antichrist and a covenant and the tribulation period as it's told.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is that the system is unfalsifiable. Now, of course, people say, oh, well, it's good to not be falsifiable. You don't want to be proven wrong. That's actually not true. You want to be falsifiable. You want to have someone to be able to disprove your system wrong. My system is falsifiable. Omni's system is falsifiable. Most people in the audience have a falsifiable view if you give enough evidence. But with the preterists, they'll always frame it within their presumptions. Like everything had to take place in 70 AD. Jesus had to come back. And so everything has to be fashioned in that framework. And so there is no future hope for you, essentially, in terms of on this earth and getting physically resurrected and stuff like that. And so that's my main objection. It's just not falsifiable. And so there's no reason for me to believe it. Why would I believe in an unfalsifiable system if, but basically, why would I believe in an unfalsifiable system, that has very little to do with me?
Okay, so to make sure I get this right, so they look at the passages of things haven't been done, in both like fulfillment of certain things, regardless of where they are, because you just cited a couple of them, like one of them being how come everybody's not saved, and and then etc. etc. So instead of like actually understanding that this can be fulfilled at a different time, they just take it as like, oh, because these things haven't happened, we assume that they already did, therefore preterism. Like, can you do you think you can summarize it with that point?
Yeah, so I think essentially what you have is a system that prioritizes certain texts above others. Again, in my view, preterists could disagree. They say, no, we take the Bible and well, it really is focusing a lot on Matthew 24 and Luke 21 and sometimes Matthew 16.
Mm-hmm.
And they take these really improbable conclusions of the text, hey, if you squint a certain way, if you look at it a certain way, you could get some form of preterism. And then they do that to the exclusion of these myriad, like hundreds of passages that clearly discuss the second coming of Christ and what it's like and what's going to happen. And to say that Jesus is out of line with the Old Testament, which they wouldn't say that, but essentially what you're saying is Jesus is out of line with the Old Testament. He's out of line with Revelation. He is not consistent because he said this generation, and we have to interpret everything through that. I think that's just dishonest.
Okay, so I would say this is probably like the worst view because like it's just based off of huge assumptions on little to no. So they do have like 70 AD. That's the only thing that they can really base off like historic wise, with the re-emphasizing on this generation. Like they take it from a lower approach. Past that, they can't really show things have been fulfilled. It's just mostly based on assumption.
Right.
Can I think you already quoted some passages they'll use to like all of these things haven't happened, therefore preterism. But is there a lot of passages that you can bring up? Because I know you and I talked about this pretty on and off because it's just a humorous view. But can you cite passages as to like why that couldn't be the case? Why preterism can't be true?
Yeah, some passages that actually passages that people bring up often are 1 Corinthians 15. The preterists can go. They can deny that that's a physical resurrection. I don't know how you could do that, but they could deny that, or they could say it is a physical resurrection and just beyond all logic and reason and thinking and everything.
And thinking,
they could
okay.
say, they could
That's
just say,
funny.
well, yes, it was a physical resurrection, but we don't know about it. It was secret. It was never recorded. Just millions and millions and millions of saints just in the snap of your fingers just disappeared from the entire Western Hemisphere. And you're like, hold up, wait a minute, something ain't right, because you can't tell me that millions and millions and millions of people, they bring up Matthew 27 that talks about some of the saints rising up and going to cities. Yeah, that's a small occurrence. Millions and millions of people in the span of a second, just complete, like at 70 AD. And it's like, you also have to assume that so many people were not saved. All the church fathers were not saved. Clement of Rome was not saved. And he never documented this either. So Clement of Rome is a first century Christian. He wrote in the 90s to the Corinthians, and yet he never mentions anything like this. I mean, what a cataclysmic event of millions of his friends and Christians just being disappeared before his very eyes, no trace of them at all, and he just never mentions it. It's completely from the annals of history. It's basically conspiracy theory in its best form. So that's a solid passage. But I think even a better one is Hebrews 2 verse 8, right? People don't bring this up, so I'll bring up the whole text. So it says, starting in verse 5, it says, "For unto the angels has he not put in subjection the world to come, of which we speak, but one in a certain place testified, saying, What is man that you are mindful of him, or the son of man that you visit him? You have made him a little lower than the angels, and you have crowned him with glory and honor, and you did set him over the works of your hands. You have put all things in subjection under his feet." And you can read the original psalm for yourself exactly what that is.
Mm-hmm.
It's the physical birds and the beasts of the field and everything in Genesis 1. And it says, For in that he put in all things in subjection under him, he left nothing that is not put under him. But this is key. But now we do not yet see all things put under him. So the writer of Hebrews, right before 70 AD, is saying, look, we don't yet see physically with our eyes all things under the foot of man. Because clearly the world is corrupt. It's evil. It's hating Christians. It's persecuting Christians. Jesus is not ruling with a rod of iron. So clearly something's wrong, right? But we do not yet see it. So it's still a future event that's going to be fulfilled. And then in the next verse, we know that Jesus is the one who's going to fulfill that. He is the representative of humanity, right? And so this verse shows us that we can't leave this verse unfulfilled. It's yet to be fulfilled. And again, 1 Corinthians 15, right, focusing on the other same idea of the kingdom, it says, but every man in his own order, Christ the first fruits, after those who are Christ who's coming. He's talking about the resurrection. Okay, so Christ comes back, then everyone is resurrected, and then the end comes. When does it come? When he puts down all deliverance of the kingdom of God, even the Father, when he puts down all rule and all authority and all power, all rule, all authority, all same thing in Hebrews chapter 2, which includes all of the magistrates, all of the rulers of this world, Satan being destroyed, right? The last, for he must reign till he put all his enemies under his feet. The last enemy shall be destroyed is death. For he has put all things under him, but when he says all things are put under him, it is manifest that he is accepted, which did put all things under him. And so when all things shall be subdued unto him, then shall the Son also be subject unto him that puts all things under him, that God may be all in all. So it's consistent over and over again. All things are under his feet. All things are ruled. All things are destroyed. All enemies are defeated, right? But what do we still have? We still have death, spiritual and physical. We still have destruction. We still have sin. We still have enemies of Christ. Most of the world is antagonistic to Christ. You can't tell me that the world is under his rule and authority and power if 90% of people are in opposition to Christ. That cannot make sense to not to me and not to the text. And again, this happens after his coming, right? Which in their view, if it was 70 AD, well, what happened after 70 AD? Nothing. Absolutely nothing changed from AD 70 to AD 71. So these two texts, I think, are really powerful for disproving preterism.
Okay, I like the point that you made earlier, because I don't think anybody brings up that point. If like the end times was really at 70 AD, you would have heard some inclinations of this popping out sooner rather than later. Like, why is preterism coming up as a late development rather than everybody acknowledging and recognize it as like an undisputed fact? So I think that's actually a good point. I think somebody might have like assumed, something happened and they can't see it. I can't remember which one it was. I'm pretty sure it was written in some book. I think Josephus is the one who like commented about it, that some prophecy was being fulfilled, but I don't think he was remotely talking about preterism or like some proto version of it. I think that's a really good point. Because if let's say like it just happened and there was no point of commentating, or like acknowledge that it happened, what would actually be the explanation for the lack of thereof during the early church and forward?
Yeah, I think these are because remember, at the end of the day, I realized something. Yep. Preterists are not exegetical. So when you're dealing with a preterist, you're not dealing with an exegetical claim. You're not dealing with a claim from the text, because you don't get preterism from the text. I really don't see preterism in the Bible. People say, "Oh, you see it, you know it." I really don't see it.
You know, yeah.
I'm 100% honest. Like, if anyone has ever debated me on it, if anyone has ever heard, spoke with me on it, and I said I genuinely don't see what you're talking about, I am genuine. Like, this is coming from my heart. I really don't see what you're talking about. I don't see 70 AD in everywhere in the Bible. I see it in maybe some places, but not everywhere. I don't see how Matthew 24 is fulfilled in 70 AD. I don't see how Luke 21, the later half of 25 to 28, I don't see how that's fulfilled in 70 AD, right? There's like, I just can't in a good conscience bring myself to believe that. And so, for that reason, I can't be a preterist. And you're dealing with a historical claim because preterists, whenever they say, "Oh, this was fulfilled in 70 AD," your job is not to disprove that. It's to say, "No, prove that."
Yeah.
Like you made a historical claim, prove that claim. Prove to me there is an antichrist. Prove
Right,
to me
because
he stayed in the temple. Prove
right,
to me
because
all
at
that
that
stuff.
point I'm just like, okay, just because you say it, now you're essentially asking me to just outright believe you instead of like verifying, can we actually look into it, test it to see if it actually aligns, rather than just trust me, essentially.
Yeah, literally the peak. Just trust me, bro.
Okay. All right. What about other passages? Because I know, like, I study into it and things. I still can't believe how they have Ditmar on their side when he literally disproved them with a couple of good points. I had my good points even before that video. One of them is being like you're talking about Matthew 24, how it separates the timing, and you can
Right.
really go with like two different arguments with this one. The first argument is when Jesus talking about the day and hour, he's really just answering portions of the question, not the whole question entirely. So he talks about what are the signs, when will be the time of your coming, and the coming of the end of the world. So he actually answers the first and the third part, but he avoids the when portion of that question. So all that time when you read from verses 1 all the way, well, it really starts at verse 3 all the way down there until verse 32, if I'm not mistaken, when it's talking about the day and hour. Um, the fact that it has the word "but," it's literally nullifying what he has said thus far, and the nullifier is the inclusion with the when. So um, you can't really assume like that's what he was referring to about this generation, because imagine reading the whole entire book and reaching up to that point, assuming like he's talking about the end, which is supposedly from their view near, when he automatically negates that by separating the when. Because imagine he was always implying 70 AD, 70 AD, 70 AD, and then we're just a couple of like was it? I think it was like 42 years short, give or take, of the day and hour, the end of the world. He says, but when, he just doesn't actually elaborate on that. So that's kind of weird. And then the second part is, let's say we do grant that. Why is Christ contradicting himself? Was like no one knows, which we know the word there is Greek for oiden. And so if we were to take this from the Jewish perspective, basically Jesus saying no one makes known or no one tells or declares the day and hour. Nobody on earth, no, not even the Son, referring to himself, only the Father. Why is Jesus contradicting himself, saying he can't declare when obviously before this chapter he already has, and also with the parallel gospels? It just wouldn't make sense. So how do they reconcile from their viewpoint?
Well, what exactly are they reconciling?
I don't know, because like there's like they're essentially saying like Jesus always implied or outright stated 70 AD, but even Jesus'
Right.
own statements just like go against that, or another way is to say this contradicts. So how do they get out of this like hole that they find themselves in? I just never understood
I
that
mean,
part.
because the main interpretive method of preterists, and again, preterists have even told me this, so this is not even me strawmanning.
Yep.
Their main interpretive method is they're going to take the time statements of the Bible hyper literally. And when I mean hyper literally, like there's no movement, there's no nuance. It must take place within that expected generation of 40 years, which generation in the Bible doesn't always mean that, but you know, you like consistently they're referring to that. They take those passages like when James says the Lord comes soon, or Paul says be ready. We're waiting for that blessed hope, or you see or it says the you statements. Oh, you will see Son of Man, or
Yeah,
we
yeah,
will be
that one.
changed. Which again, that's inconsistent, especially if you're free grace. But they take all these statements hyper literally, right? And then they take the generation statements hyper literally. They find no nuance. They reject all alternate readings. And so they're like, okay, the time statements, boom, within 40 years. How do we fit everything eschatologically within 40 years? And so they'll do allegorization, spiritualization. Like the favorite thing that preterists do oftentimes is they'll find like some other passage in the Bible that sort of uses this imagery as a metaphor,
Mm-hmm.
and then they'll take that metaphorical imagery and then impose it like hundreds or even thousands of years after it was originally written into Jesus's words. Like Jesus says, the stars will fall down from heaven. Well, that didn't happen. There were no earthquakes at the time. There were no giant cataclysmic, stars falling down, or even angels. If you want to take stars as angels, but what they'll do is they'll say, well, but in Isaiah 13, again, assuming that's for the reading of Isaiah 13, in Isaiah 13, it talks about the Babylonian kings and the rulers as stars falling from heaven in a metaphorical sense. So that's what Jesus means in Matthew 24. And then you have to scratch your head and say, why would you think that? Like what compels you to go from this passage to this other with like this one word similarity? Or like in Daniel 9, it talks about the city being overthrown with a flood, right? Or it'll talk about the waters or something, or and then they'll compare it with like armies, or they'll take Jesus' statements of coming with the clouds of heaven, and again they'll go to passages like Isaiah 19 where God is riding on a cloud, and that's metaphorical or something like that. Or they'll go to Exodus chapter 1 and 2, which says the people cried with a voice that never has been and never shall be, and they'll compare it to Matthew 24 that says it was a tribulation like never has been and never will be, and they'll say, oh, that's just hyperbolic language, it's not literal, right? And so it wasn't really the worst thing that happened to the Jewish people, which is why, again, not all of them, but some of them do deny the Holocaust, because obviously if you have the Holocaust, the worst thing to happen to the Jewish people, 5 to 6 million Jewish people died, right? Way more than the million in Jerusalem. Some of them just denied it. Oh, that wasn't really real, or oh, those aren't real Jews. And that's where it gets actually dangerous morally.
Okay, so really, every time when there's like a discrepancy review, if you just cite certain passages, and I'll just name like a couple that we already discussed about, like Acts 1 saying, the same Jesus you're seeing coming up will come down in similar like manner.
Right.
They'll conveniently say like, oh, that means he'll come back spiritually, even though the text doesn't allow that. Or Zechariah
Right.
14, where it says when he steps on the foot on the Mount of Olives, it'll be split from the east to the west, which hasn't happened yet. So they have to come up with like some kind of random answer. It seems like every time when you press on them, I'm like, okay, let's say we just grant this that 70 AD has happened, and then instead of like waiting for these certain things to happen at their appointed times, we're just assuming that 70 AD is fulfillment of all of these proceeding on forward. So like, can we look at history to see if it did happen, and if it didn't, what's your answer to that?
Right.
So they mostly just make up a convenient answer on the spot. You just have to see of all these unanswered passages from there, and it's either over spiritualized, hyperbolic. It doesn't actually pertain to anything, but at the same time it does, because 70 AD. So if you really think about it, if you try to like associate any other events similar to it, it has to be like explained by not tying it down to any event besides 70 AD. It's like you just have
Right.
to assume that they happen somewhere. We just couldn't observe it at any capacity.
Right. Yeah. So, like, it's just not falsifiable. It's not historical. Um, like, and it leads you to some wild conclusions that, like again, not all preterists believe this. They're very fractured, but some preterists don't even believe Jesus is a man. They believe that Jesus is sort of like a wisp, and when he died and resurrected and ascended into heaven, he sort of shed off his snake skin. Again, this is Don Preston's words, key figure in full preterism, that he shed off his skin like a snake and then ascended into heaven as a spirit, and now he's not physical anymore. He's just purely spiritual, you know, and so
Quick
and so his
question: where does he even
resurrection.
get that? Like, where does the snake skin? And because he just sounds like he's just describing Satan. I ain't gonna hold you, but is he getting it from his own imagination, or does he have like passages that like obviously like led him to having this like view on Jesus not having a physical body anymore? Because like, what would be the whole point of the resurrection?
I would say what a lot of preterists go to is they go to 1 Corinthians 15:45, and it says, so it says in verse 42, so also is the resurrection of the dead. So again, when you press the preterists on the resurrection, see, again, most of them will just deny it's physical. And so they'll go to at the end of it, and they'll say, so, and the resurrection, it is sown in incorruption, it is raised sown in corruption, it is raised in corruption. It is sown in dishonor, it is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, it is raised in power. It is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. There is a so what they do with the natural body and spiritual body is they think natural means fleshly, natural means physical, right?
Okay.
As in it includes the physical matter. But see, in actuality, what natural just means is that it's empowered by your natural life. It's empowered by your life that you were given on your when you were born, and when Adam was born. When Adam was born, well, from the dust, he was born a natural body because his body was attuned to the natural functions of a human being. The word natural is the Greek word psychikos, right? Which is the same exact Greek word used in 1 Corinthians 2 to mean the natural man, the unsaved man with his natural functions and operations. And so it's not saying that it's not it's physical. It's saying that it's built for the natural human living, right? But when we get the spiritual body does not mean it's a wisp or it's not physical. Spiritual body means that it is built and operated by the Spirit so that it can do spiritual things, right? Spiritually attuned things. It's not corruptible. It's not sinful. It's not mortal, right? It's not capable of death. And so it's the same Greek word in 1 Corinthians 2, which says, we who are spiritual have the mind of Christ. We who are spiritual doesn't mean that you're a wisp. If you're a spiritual man, that doesn't mean that you are not a physical man. It means that you're a man that is aligned with God's Spirit. And that's all that it means. Paul is not inventing a new category of resurrection bodies. He's clarifying what the resurrection body actually is, which is still physical.
Actually, this throws a whole monkey in the wrench, because if they're gonna cite 1 Corinthians 15, you said verse 45, right?
Yeah, 44 and 45.
All right, so they can't pick and choose, because it seems like the text is intending for them to understand we have both of those, natural and the spiritual body, and they serve their own function separately, but they go hand in hand. However, Preston, like you said, is just taking this view as like, okay, you have the natural body just so it can, like, synthesize by removing the shell, I guess, and then somehow becoming this immaterial thing, and then will ascend like in Christ's manner. So I do see where he's getting that, because like he can't really fathom that, I guess like the rest of 1 Corinthians 15 where the incorruptible will raise, the corruptible will raise incorruptible, right? Is that how the text goes?
Yeah. So it says first. So this is a really solid passage. Mm-hmm. In the end, it says, "Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we will all be changed. Yep. In the moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet." So again, there's two views on this. Like, a lot of preterists will say, "Oh, this happened in 70 A.D." Other preterists will say, "No, this is continually happening every time a believer dies." So they're not linked up on that. "For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality. So then, when this corruptible shall have put on incorruption, and when this mortal shall have put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your sting? O grave, where is it?" That Hebrew word in the original, I believe it's in Isaiah chapter 25. No, it's in Hosea 13:14. "Oh, grave, where is your victory?" That's talking about physical death,
Yeah.
right? "Oh, grave," the word is
Clearly.
Sheol, right? Consistently refers to physical death. You see it in Psalms chapter 16, Acts chapter 2, uh, as many places. Sheol rarely refers to hell. And so when Paul is saying that grave has no victory, grave has no sting, he's not talking about the spiritual death, even though that is true. He is clearly talking in context about the physical, right? That we have victory over through Christ. So believers will not stay physically dead. Yes, there will be a generation of believers that will not face physical death because they've been raptured. But for the believers that have, they will not remain physically dead,
Right.
right? They will eventually be raised up as an incorruptible body. So yeah.
Okay. So I think it is fair to say that preterism is the worst view of them all because it's really ahistoric, and so because of like lack of credibility, and there's actually nothing to tie down because it's still an assumption that it takes place to 7 AD. I really don't know how they can tie into that because clearly, like if we're talking about 7 AD, which is a fulfillment of the end of the world, clearly that hasn't happened. Like even if you were to ask somebody outside of any religious sector or context, they will clearly tell you like if it's the end of the world, I must have missed it or something. Or it kind of makes it
No.
seem like God is inept to like actually create a perfect world when, end of the world happens. All these things that were promised are quote unquote fulfilled, and it's still like in this condition. I must have, I must have been in like Earth 3.0 or something. So, um,
Yep.
yeah. Past that, you know, I think we were supposed to watch a couple of videos. I'll probably have to pull them up another time where they make fun of dispensation. But what I guess we'll finish off on this and then move on to the other eschatological views. Why did they have a huge disdain for dispensation?
Well, specifically dispensationalism. And so, for anyone that in the audience that doesn't know, dispensationalism is. So I'm going to be upfront. I am a dispensationalist
Mm-hmm.
for the audience, and basically, it's a systematic theological belief that has a very particular hermeneutic. And so the theological system is derived from a very specific hermeneutic, and this hermeneutic is what we would normally call the literal, grammatical, historical. So we're analyzing the text from three different angles: what it means literally, what it means on a grammatical, textual level, like what do the words mean, um, and on a historical level, like we're looking at the history, what's the context, what's going on, what's the Sitz im Leben. And so, generally, when you follow, and we don't apply that not just to soteriology, we apply that not just to ecclesiology, not just to the Trinity, not just to whatever doctrine, but particularly in this context, we're applying it to um, eschatology, right? What does the Bible say about the end times and prophetic events? And the main thing about dispensationalism is that it is very text. It is a text priority system. So most systems are testament priority. So what they'll do is they will say, okay, we're going to prioritize the New Testament and we're going to read the New Testament into the Old Testament. And that sometimes works, but it doesn't always work if you don't have a New Testament text that directly quotes the Old Testament. And remember, the New Testament is like a fifth of the length of the Old Testament, so that can't work. But what we do is we say, look, we're going to look at the New Testament text, and then we're also going to look at the Old Testament text. What did that mean in its context? And when you do that, you come away with certain theological views when you prioritize the previous revelation in its context, and then you understand the importance of the next revelation in its context and how it spans into progressive revelation. And so what you come away with is certain theological views like premillennialism, pre-tribulation, distinction between the church and Israel, uh, 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 you know, a glory of God purpose in the Bible, which is what we call doxological. And of course, we have, the belief that the believer is not under the Mosaic law for their sanctification. And so I think that these views are pretty consistent in dispensationalism.
Okay, so it's basically making a separation into like one category of believers to the other, so it shouldn't be conflated one and the same. Is what you're basically trying to say.
In a lot of ways, it does lead to that, right? Because when you're looking at Old Testament saints, they're living under the law of Moses,
Mm.
usually, for what we know from the most of the Bible. They're living under the law of Moses. They're living in a theocracy called the nation of Israel. They're living in certain conditions. They have different expectations of them. Now we're living in the church. We're living in what some call the age of grace, although that's not exactly accurate, um, or the dispensation of grace. And so, with that, these believers have a different code, different laws, different stewardship. Because remember, the Greek word dispensation is the word oikonomia, which means house rules. So it literally just means a stewardship, a house rule for whatever period or administration you're in. And so believers, Old Testament, different expectations. Believers, church age, different expectations. Believers in the tribulation after the rapture, different expectations, et cetera, et cetera. But obviously, this is important to remember. There are not different ways of salvation. Everyone
Yeah,
who has ever been saved is always eternally secure by faith in God and what he's revealed. So, yeah.
yeah, that part. I guess before we move on, hold on. Sorry, my throat is being annoying. Um, there was actually two things I forgot to mention. I don't want to move on before mentioning it. So I did see
Sure.
that like video that Noah posted, and I actually watched it through, and it was pretty hard to watch it without feeling like it was a huge waste of time because how cringy it was. But the person who is now agnostic, who used to be Christian, kept bringing up the point that the ones who formed preterism are now like unbelievers. Like they actually don't believe in. Well, actually, I'll take that back. I don't think they become unbelievers. They just don't believe in preterism anymore. Shouldn't that actually like prove a point against those who are considering preterism or just now preterism? Like, why would he even bother? Because the person that literally pioneered it doesn't believe in he himself.
Yeah, no, I think that's like, and this is the same thing that is true for Islam. So in Islam, you have a lot of stories, like even one of Muhammad's scribes, he apostatized from Islam. He realized, no, Muhammad is a false prophet. He's not speaking the truth of God. He's not speaking from Allah. And then, obviously he was forced by death or the threat of death to come back to Islam. And this is what Islam does as well, right? It forces people to stay in, or if they apostatize, well, they could, in Sharia law, you can actually kill apostates. So, how does that relate? Well, because you have, like, if you have the main people, the strongest defenders of your belief system, even the founders of it, they're doubting and they're leaving that belief system, that should make you question, hey, the foundation of this, why do we believe this, right? If the people that were smarter than us, that came before us, that studied it more, they didn't even believe it until the end. It's like, imagine if the apostles,
Mm-hmm.
like all of the apostles at the end of their life, they didn't go through with their death. They were like, oh, no, Jesus didn't rise from the dead, Jesus didn't resurrect, I made it up, it was a prank, guys.
Yeah.
Okay. It's like I would feel shaken in my faith. I'd be like, dude, the founders, well, the founder ultimately is Jesus, but the apostles and prophets that form the foundation of the church, these people didn't even last until the end. That would not feel good or comfortable at all. I would feel unease about that, and I think that you should consider that if you're considering preterism.
Okay. So one last thing. I know you and I joked about it, but what can you attribute to the rise of preterism? Because in that same video, um, the person that we're familiar with made that claim that it's only getting bigger rather than smaller when it comes to
Hmm.
preterism. So, what would you attribute the rise of preterism? Like, if you were to factor in everything you just said, can you like name them a list, or is there one that usurps it all? And I guess my best
No.
assumption is just like, you know, it's a step before atheism, right? Like you see
Mhm.
where where the Bible makes these statements, and it becomes too long and it drags out. So because instead of seeing God from His timeline when He decides to do the things, the when portion, it seems like we get impatient, and so we make these justifications or realizations to be like, okay, I have to interpret a text because obviously if it didn't happen already, it's either the Bible's fault or they did happen. Therefore, like, why even be a Christian? I'm an atheist. So that's something that you and I talked about. So I don't know if you want to
Yeah,
elaborate on that.
I wouldn't attribute the rise of any particular belief, any heretical or just not true belief to any one thing. There's definitely some things that have a plurality over others, but for one, it's just ignorance about eschatology. A lot of Christians believe, rightly so, that Jesus will come back, but they don't have a foundational
I still buy
reason
that
for
in.
that.
Yeah.
Right, like they're studying soteriology, they're learning about the Trinity. They barely even consider the when Jesus returns and stuff like that. And so then when someone comes along and aggressively promotes, no, Jesus already came back, it already happened, 70 AD, et cetera, et cetera. What you have with that pressure is just this what you have with that pressure is just this person that's almost forced into this belief. It's actually very unsettling because people I know have had this happen to them, and it's actually very dangerous. And please stay away if anyone, I don't care who it is, if anyone aggressively like randomly messages you about their heretical beliefs or not, or even just any belief, if they're just
Yeah.
aggressively harassing you about it, doesn't matter what it is, just don't interact with that person, right? It's not good because they're going to force you into something, and then you're going to be dependent on them for that knowledge. And then secondly, I think also is the fact that people have just a growing resentment toward futurism. The pop futurism, the one that tries to set dates and stuff, and so they're growing resentment toward it,
Mm-hmm.
because the attribute the rapture predictions, they've been wrong, right? People like uh, Tucker, what is it? Tucker, that guy that does the news. I forgot what his name was. But basically, he was on CNN, or was he on Fox? Yeah, I think he was on Fox. And basically, is a growing hatred toward dispensationalism and futurism and pre-trib. And so what it does is that it fuels the attraction toward the opposite of that. Oh, I'm going against my enemy by siding with the enemy, which is preterism, right? And then of course there's also this growing sadness, depression, among even Christians about, man, why won't Jesus return? Why has it been so long? Why isn't he coming back yet? It's been 2,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they don't listen to the words of Peter that says 1,000 years is as day, a day is as 1,000 years,
Yeah.
right? And what they do is they want to make it nice and neat. They don't want to have that anxiety, so they'll use the wrong solution, and they'll say, "Oh, but it already happened, so I don't got to worry about that now." Right? And so that's part of it. Um, and then of course it's the simplest answer, sometimes the best one, just bad exegesis. Not all Christians are good at studying their Bible. Some of them are just bad at studying their Bible, and of course when they come to a difficult passage, they sometimes take the most outrageous view rather than taking the simplest view, which is just, hey, I don't know what this means, but I know it can't contradict this,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's important. Oh, Tucker Carlson. Yeah, no. Yeah, sorry.
Tucker Carlson making a rapture prediction?
No, Tucker Carlson doesn't make it, but he doesn't like he sort of mocks those who make it. And by the way, as a side note, Tucker Carlson is now softly supporting Sharia law and
Of course he
the
is. He's
Taliban.
controlled off.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
knew it, bro. Anyways, um, yeah, I also that's one of those things that I don't like about rapture predictions, because even though I made one and I'm gonna stick firm to it, like, I don't make it dogmatic. Like, if you don't want to believe it, sure. Like, I wrote an extensive like paper about like how did I come to that conclusion, because um, clearly when Jesus said, my Father will make it to be known, that means like you will have access to that information to one point. But unfortunately, people have made predictions outside of that information. So I do see it is possible for people um, to come to that understanding, but they can't come into themselves or use like certain methodology outside of the Bible to come to that conclusion. Or even if you have the Bible and you're trying to use a methodology, like you can't actually deduce it down without like the father's approval, because he's the one that's make it to be known. So either you agree or disagree. That's besides the point. But it was never like one of those things where you constantly make these predictions that are like, oh, it wasn't as accurate. The times in the seasons, specifically the appointed times, pertaining to Acts 1, they're always set by the Father. So he's the one who's basically declaring when things happen. So that remains unchanged. But I do see that, constantly when people are making these predictions, they have little to no basis, essentially. And they keep coming back wrong. I do see as it wears down everybody when it comes to these certain things. So I guess I could see that. So out of all the eschatology views, you say this is the worst one, right?
Oh yeah, there's no question about it. It's exegetically bankrupt. It's exegetically bankrupt. It's theologically just absurd. It's historically unverifiable. It's logically unfalsifiable. And of course, what this leads to is it requires other heresies on top of it to survive. Because the people I know that have promoted this the most aggressively, what they've done is they've further said, like now they're denying the Trinity. They're denying the Trinity. They're becoming binitarian. They're denying the Holy Spirit is God. They're denying that the Holy Spirit is a distinct person who is God. And they're also denying that sin exists after 70 AD. These people are denying the future judgment of the dead. These people are slipping into heresies that say you can be in the lake of fire and still be saved. These people are slipping into heresies that, just get worse and worse and worse. And they're slipping into heresies about Christology. They don't believe Jesus is a man with a physical body now. And so there's just so much wrong with the belief that it's like you're going to get worse and worse into heresy. So stay away. The public service announcement, PSA, stay away.
Yeah, and this started a year ago, mind you. Literally, like, up to date. That with the introduction of this, it degenerated onto this, this layered heresies. So I think I agree with that. I think I do agree that it's the worst view because when I didn't know about it and when I started slowly understanding a little bit more, I'm just like, who can believe such a unfleshed out, because that's what it really is, an unfleshed view that comes from Roman Catholicism. Like they see one thing that happened and then the rest of the verses in that said chapter, it's like it's already done with it. Just like there's like 90 other things you needed to like tie it down to, whatever they may be. They just see that one thing and I'm like, okay guys, we're done here. Like, what even is that? So I just can't really reconcile some view that just doesn't really explain anything. If anything, it just takes it away. So I think it'll be in the D tier for now. I think it'll permanently stay there. If I remember to put an F tier, I would. But this is definitely one of those worst views ever, because I kid you not, the little to a lot of interactions that we had with individuals like them, they presented so many arguments, they presented so much counter arguments, and they're all doo-doo. Like, not even being exaggerated here, but they really make up some wild explanations, and it's a lot of like, hopefully they're naive and dumb enough to believe it, so I can like get the upper hand. That's what it really feels like the conversation dumbs down to, unfortunately.
Yeah.
All right, so now that's been done, because I think we talked a lot about it. The next view would be, let me see if I can pull it up, because I kind of closed it. Here it is. Oh, they all went away. Hilarious. All right, I guess we could start naming them off, because you're more familiar with them. What is that thing? Post-millennialism. How do you feel about that?
So, I'm not gonna say, oh, this is the most retarded. I mean, don't get me wrong, it is nonsensical. Like, just no offense to the post-mill. It when I say nonsensical, I mean I can't make sense of it, because I don't I can understand the claim, but this is essentially right. Post-millennialism is this belief, usually paired with Christian domination, paired with covenant theology, etc., where you have Jesus, instead of returning before the millennium begins, he returns after the millennium begins. And some of them will define the millennium as this unspecified period of growth. Others will say that it's post-millennialism is literally 1,000 years. Some of the classic post-millennials believe that. But essentially, it's this view that's actually it's sort of like amillennialism, but it's more physical. It's definitely more physical in nature, because what they'll do is they'll say, well, Christ's kingdom is now, right? It's growing now on the earth, and so Christianity's spreading. It's doing well globally. Everyone is eventually going to turn, right before the coming of Christ, almost everyone is going to be a Christian. Almost everyone is going to, have faith in God. Very few people are going to actually believe in, are actually going to be unbelievers in Christ. And, it basically, it's
What
like
the-
something percent. Like, again, this is what they officially teach. People like Joel Webbin, people like Kenneth Gentry. You go to the post-millennialism apologetics, they consistently teach this. And so, and so what they'll do is they'll say there'll be Christian prosperity, Christian nationalism all over the world, slowly growing, and then the end will come. And usually what they'll do with explanations of like Revelation events and explanations of these other is they'll say that those are historical. They're taking place throughout different places in history. The first seal was in some time period, and the second seal in another. So it's a mix of preterism and futurism, where they'll say, yeah, some of the events in Revelation have been fulfilled, but then some of the events are fulfilled later in the future. And then it's a historical view of Revelation. And so that view has gone very, very low nowadays. It's pretty rare that you find a post-millennial, and pretty rare that you find a historical post-millennial. That's really rare, because it just doesn't line up with what we see today. So what a lot of post-millennialists have done is now they're saying, no, it could be hundreds of thousands of years before the return of Christ, because you got to have majority of people saved, and you got to have Christian development and technology and whatever. So that view, to me, doesn't make sense with the scriptures, doesn't make sense in history, doesn't make sense with just the trajectory of the world. And that view, of course, denies Revelation 19 and 20 and the flow of it, which is that you have the return of Christ and then the millennial kingdom, not before it.
All right, so you said a couple of things that got me raising my eyebrows. I kid you not. I'm trying to remember what it was, because it happened a while ago. I was just warming up tea because I can't stop coughing. But what was it that you said that made me raise my eyebrow?
Oh yeah, that most people will be Christian. Is that it?
No, it was something around there. I think you mentioned it right before. I can't remember. Oh, Jesus will come after the millennium. I think that was the first, because that doesn't make sense, because it literally says he'll be reigning with. So I don't know how they can get around that. You said it was something too. They take everything too physical. I just trying to remember what it was. I wish I would have.
Yeah, because I believe that there will be a physical kingdom on earth, right? But what they do is that they sort of mesh it together with all of these other rulers, and you don't have Jesus in Jerusalem, and you don't have they're mixing in the spiritual with the physical, right? And they're saying Jesus is reigning over the earth, and there's going to be physical prosperity, but he's reigning spiritually. And so it's okay, how are those two happening at the same time? Because when Jesus reigns over creation, he's still God. He's controlling everything. All things are upheld by the word of his power. And so, yes, he's reigning like he's always been in that sense. But there's a very particular sense that the Bible speaks of, which is the Davidic millennial reign in Jerusalem. Psalm 72 talks about it. Psalms chapter 2, Psalms chapter 1, verse 10. Psalms chapter 1:10, Zechariah 14, etc., etc. And you see consistently, it is talking about a physical Jesus physically being here with a physical reign, but then they sort of conflate it with the spiritual reign in heaven and stuff like that. So I think that that's their main hang.
Okay, I see. Yeah, because I was about to say that. So they really are just confusing. Like, so obviously God's rule never changed because I don't know why they forget this. Um, where went back to get the glory that he once had. So he momentarily put it on the side, which is obviously like his rule in heaven. So that was never a question. I guess they're conflating that because it's forming here in the earthly kingdom. That's how they know like it's post because it's forming on the earthly kingdom. The kingdom is being established, but the kingdom was always there. It's just the introduction to the earth was made known through Christ, and then the availability and to actually enter through the kingdom is through the gospel, essentially. So I think they don't understand like the difference there and how to be in God's economy, I guess. Um, yeah, so I guess this view doesn't work out as well. Could you say it's a little bit less worse than preterism, or because it seems like it's not really a good view either, to be honest.
No, it's not. A lot of them deny the rapture. Most of them deny the rapture as we know it, and so I would say it is like a step above. Like there's preterism is like I don't know. That's like not even D tier is good. That's an F tier. F tier belief.
It's a Z tier belief. Yeah, yeah.
Put it in its own tier, and then right above that you have post millennialism. So I would say
got you. The new F tier is going to be the preterism tier with preterism being in there. So it's almost hard to like put it somewhere else, So it'll be in its own tier, and then you have the post millennial on top of that. That's hilarious, dude. All right, so yeah, I mean, I don't really see how post millennial can work. Like obviously, like Christ does rule with his kind. He has a purpose for that. So there's the things that happen within that. Revelation doesn't really like elaborate that, but you can see that bits and pieces in the Old Testament for sure.
Yeah.
So they do have some things explained, but it seems like they're reversed. Like some spiritual aspects are done physically, but some physical aspects is done spiritually. Whereas the preterism, they just make up convenient answers wherever they do like. Okay. I see where their mind gravitates to. All right. Okay, so what about amillennialism?
Yeah, again, I think that this is a little bit better, depending on your articulation of it. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit better than post-mill, because I think that, with post-mill, you got that mix of the physical and spiritual, like that mesh. I don't think it works well. And of course, obviously, historically, it's been down on the down tier. But consistently, ever since the 4th century, amillennialism has been growing in the Catholic Church, right? Most Catholics you'll find are amillennial. Most Catholics you'll find are a mix of futurist, preterist theology with amillennialism. And so amillennialism, the most popular form of it is what we now know as preterist, partial preterist amillennialism. This is like R.C. Sproul type language, R.C. Sproul, Hoekema, and stuff like that. And what you'll find with these people is they'll argue like a preterist for a lot of the time. They'll say, no, this is 70 AD. Revelation is about Jerusalem. The whore of Babylon is Jerusalem, and stuff like that. And they'll compare the kings with the Caesar kings, the kings of Rome in Revelation 17. And so they'll have that aspect. But then on top of that, right, they'll still be a futurist. Like they'll say, okay, yeah, there's some future things that have to happen. The new heaven and new earth, the new heaven and new earth. There's the resurrection. There's the judgment of Christ. So I'm basically lined up with the amillennialists on, hey, there's going to be a judgment. Jesus is going to come back, and we don't know when he's going to come back. So it's completely, it could happen any moment, right? So that's that sort of imminency feature that I think is not present in a lot of systems. And of course, I agree with them on, hey, there's going to be a physical new heaven and new earth, physical recreation of the world, and that's great. but I disagree with them on so much. I disagree with them on the nature of the millennium. The reason it's called amillennialism is because negates in Greek. No millennium. So what they'll say is there is no millennium, no 1,000-year period as we think of it. It's more of a metaphor for the age of the church, ever since the cross over until the second coming of Christ. And what I think the appeal of that is, it's simple. I mean, I'll grant it. It's a simple belief, straightforward. I once drew a diagram of it, and you just have the cross, and then a straight line, and then an explosion, and then boom, right? It's simple. I like it. If I had a bad conscience, I could be amillennial. But of course, because I don't think the text supports it, I can't be an amillennial.
Okay, so if you believe in amillennialism, you have a bad conscience. But you believe in preterism, you just have a dead conscience.
No, yeah, you have a conscience that's guilty in amillennialism, but like if you believe in preterism, you don't have it's just scarred.
Yeah.
That's a fault.
Smooth brain, basically. Wrinkle free. I got you. All right, so it definitely doesn't work because it does adopt that viewpoint, but then what exactly? It doesn't really give them any particular area to critique, because they're kind of they see some things are pertaining to preterism, but then they are futurists in some aspects.
Right.
But it just I think I remember now what you said when it comes to post millennialism, where it's not situated in time and it's not a finite amount of years, which I don't understand that.
Right.
So they assume that this means that, even though they don't equate to each other. I mean, what is the point of God giving a set number, 1,000 years, which is supposed to represent the Sabbath, right? Why can't it mean that? Are they just doing it because they can't compensate what it actually means, or a lack of understanding in some department that you haven't touched already?
The problem is that, and I'm going to be honest, they really have a genuine problem with Revelation 20. So what they'll do with Revelation 20, and I've seen this done hundreds of times before. If you're an amillennial watching and you've done this before, you know exactly what I'm talking about. What you'll say is well, that's just apocalyptic language. You shouldn't take that literally, And so what they'll do is they'll say you shouldn't take the language literally. It's apocalyptic. It's metaphorical. Which, first of all, apocalyptic doesn't mean metaphorical. Apocalypsis just means a revelation, an unveiling of something, right? So that doesn't really account for it.
Yeah.
And so on top of that, what they'll say is it's just metaphorical, hyperbolic, hyper spiritual language. But see, that doesn't really. The problem with that response is that doesn't really get the point of what I'm asking. I'm not asking about what you think is literal and what you think is figurative. Yeah. You could say the 1,000 years is 2,000 years. It's not relevant.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not going to my hill on that. The point is look, in Revelation 19, if you take away the chapter divisions, they don't exist, right? You take away the chapter divisions. Where do you get that Revelation 19 comes after Revelation 20, where the return of Christ comes after this reign of. And so that's the main problem, because really it specifies very specific time events. There's going to be a return of Christ. There's going to be Satan being bound, which Crab said in the comments. Amillennialists can't account for that. He's called the God of this world. He roams around as a prowling lion, right? He's the prince of the power of the air. Consistently, he's referred to as the ruler of this world after the cross. Even after the cross, after supposedly he started reigning in heaven, he was still the ruler of this world. So how can he be bound so that he deceives the nations no more, which it says verbatim in Revelation, if it literally verbatim says in 2 Corinthians 4 that he is the ruler of this world, and he blinds the minds of the unbelieving so that they cannot believe the glorious gospel of Christ. That's literally deception of the nations, which Revelation 20 says he can't do while he's bound, while the millennium is going on. So they can't account for that. And then you have a reign where the saints are raised up, right? They get glorified bodies. They reign with Jesus, and then there's a rebellion, and then Satan comes back and deceives the nations, and then he's cast in the lake of fire. In
Right.
amillennialism, you can't have that sequence of events happen as it naturally states. And so I think that just based on that text alone, amillennialism can't be true.
So for them, it happens in any order instead of like chronological order, basically.
Whatever order you want. Yeah, just pick your own adventure.
Okay, that makes sense. Um, that'll be like the only explanation from their side. Like, I'm not arguing for them, but like the only thing that'll be like logically consistent of why they think that way is that order of sequence of events does not matter here. Okay, so clearly between the three views, post and omnil, why is pre-millennial millennialism, so known to pronounce, is the correct view, and why is it the case, um,
Yeah.
eschatology wise?
Yeah, so we already hinted at before, but I'll just reiterate it. Postmillennialism is that the return of Christ happens after the millennium. Amillennialism is that there is no millennial period. It's just from Jesus's first coming to his second coming, and there is no millennium in between that and then the new heavens and new earth. And then you have this third view, which I believe is the most biblical, but it can be fractured in different ways, which the early church fathers held to, like Justin Martyr, Papias, Tertullian, Tertullian, Irenaeus, especially, right? Clement of Rome, all of them held to this view up until the early second century. You start developing with these heretical Gnostic beliefs, and so consistently, premillennialism is the belief that Jesus returns before the millennium. That's why it's premillennialism. And so what it is just exactly what I outlined in Revelation. You have the return of Christ, Satan being bound 1,000 years, so he deceives the nations the more. The saints are raised up with Christ. They reign in Jerusalem. Now, of course, you'll say, well, where does it say Jerusalem in Revelation 20? Well, it doesn't say it in Revelation 20, right? But we know from the Old Testament in Psalms chapter 2, in 2 Samuel chapter 7, in Psalms chapter 110, he consistently is reigning in Jerusalem, in Zion, and in Zechariah 14 as well, which follows a very similar pattern of Revelation 20, by the way. You see it consistently in Jerusalem. The station is in Jerusalem, a physical location on the earth. And then there's a rebellion, and then there's sin, and then there's Psalms 132 as well. Yeah, Crab mentioned it. And so it's all over the Old Testament, and you have the church fathers saying exactly this. And then there's going to be a rebellion, and then there's going to be a judgment of that. You see in Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39, it talks about Gog and Magog, right, against the holy city Jerusalem. Same exact thing happening in Revelation 20. And then the resurrection of the unrighteous, cast into the lake of fire, new heaven and new earth, consistent pattern. And I think the strength of this view is that it's very contextually literary, right? It's very chronological. It makes sense. You don't have to do some sort of spiritualization of the text. And of course, it makes me have a good conscience because I don't have to struggle with all of these difficult texts that clearly talk about a physical location. I'll say, no, that's going to happen in the future. There's no problem with that. And so I think that premillennialism is the best text to explain the Old and the New Testament, and it's also historically viable. So that's a plus.
Okay, so in comparison of these three views, it has to be the case because we're not taking the millennial view as anything but a millennial, time period. Because obviously, like the other views, because I do watch videos about this, not too intensive about it. Like I did, did study about end times. I remember right around the time when I started what's it called? Understanding preterism, because it was like a new thing to me. I didn't understand any of it, and then I started reading it. I'm like, okay, this can't be the case, whether regardless of whatever the view is, because if you kind of move these things out of its place, it doesn't make sense. So you have to make these weird justifications to explain why the millennium rule hasn't happened yet. is because it's situated in a timeline which the other two views can't. Much less preterism can explain because they have to interpret it as something other than a millennial rule. Is there a millennial rule?
Did you
Is
cut out? Okay.
I'm sorry. Is there a reason why that knowing when the millennial rule would happen is the determining factor of which view is correct?
Yeah, I think definitely because if the millennial rule happens after the return of Christ, then boom, set, game, and match, premillennialism has to be true. And if the millennial rule happens, like the millennial rule, the Davidic rule, messianic rule, happens before the return of Christ, right? Then this is where things get tricky, right? Because there's a few options you could have. You could still be premillennial and say that Jesus will reign physically on the earth for 1,000 years. But this is mostly like progressive dispensationalism, right? Where they'll argue, yes, Jesus will reign on the earth for 1,000 years, but he's now reigning spiritually in heaven in his Davidic throne. So we'll get to that later. But he is reigning on his Davidic throne right now, and so he's spiritually reigning in the messianic reign in heaven. And of course, people get that a lot from Acts chapter 2, which they think means that Jesus is now on David's throne, which of course I don't think that means that if you analyze the text carefully. And so there's a lot of different views on that, but I think still just premillennialism I think just has to be true in light of Zechariah 14, Revelation 20, and much of the Old Testament as well.
Okay, so since we're on the pre and post conversation, what about pre and post rapture? Because that kind of have its own category in its own, but still in the realm of eschatology.
Yeah, I would say my problem is, so I think if you're premillennial, you're at least like in a C tier. Like you're not like, it's like preterism at lowest tier, F tier, and then above that post mill, amil, like that's like D tier. Like I don't like it, but hey, you're not like a heretic or anything. And then above that, premillennialism, at least a C. So anything that's premillennial at least is a C. So then we got to get into the rapture views, because everyone who's premillennial believes in some kind of rapture. Okay.
Yep.
Here's the problem with post-trib, which is a belief, which, by the way, for the audience, is a belief that the rapture, the raptura harpazo, the catching up of the believers, living believers, takes place after the 7-year tribulation. So all three of these views believe in a literal 7-year tribulation period, as far as I know.
Yep.
Right. But the post-trib, I would say, is still in like low C tier, because the post-trib believes that the problem with post-trib is that it believes that the rapture takes place after it, which means, what does that mean? If the tribulation is the wrath of God, according to Revelation chapter 6, according to Zephaniah chapter 1, verse 14 and 15, according to according to when God lets out his fury and wrath on the earth multiple times in the book of Revelation and in the Old Testament. If the entire tribulation is the wrath, then you have believers in the tribulation enduring the wrath of God, right? Which, like, now what you could argue is, and what many of them do, is, and even people like John Piper, a popular post-trib proponent, he argues, well, yes, you're in the world, but you're kept from the devil. So you're in the world in the tribulation period, and then they'll go to John 16, which says, in this world you will have tribulation. And they'll say, yes, you're going to have tribulation in the world. You're going to go through these cataclysmic events, but the wrath isn't aimed toward you. The wrath isn't aimed toward you. It's towards the unbelievers. Now, in a sense, I can see that, in a sense. But the problem is that the judgments in Revelation are too cataclysmic. They're too widespread. They're too broad.
They're not contained.
They're not contained just for the unbelievers there. The believers will also have to go through it, because you have the famine, you have the pestilence, you have the wars, you have the martyrdom, you have the reign of the Antichrist. All of these things are not just the wrath of are the wrath of God, clearly, and we'll get to that in the pre-wrath view. They are the wrath of God, but I believe that but I would say that with the I would say definitely with the post-trib view, you still have believers dying because of the wrath of God, whether intentionally, indirectly, or not. And so I think that 1 Thessalonians 5, 1 Thessalonians 1 directly contradicts that,
Yeah.
because it says this, and again, this is one of the passages, right, of 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 6 to 10, that actually definitely convinced me of, well, it was one of the there's many others, but in 1 Thessalonians 5 it says, "For you yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord comes as a thief in the night." So we're talking about the day of the Lord here. The day of the Lord, the word day in here doesn't mean a 24-hour period. It means a time period, an hour, so to speak, of God's judgment on earth. And it says it comes as a thief in the night. For when they will say peace and safety, remember that later, then sudden destruction will come upon them as travail upon a woman with child. But you, so it's not going to come upon you, it's going to come upon them. You are not in darkness, that day shall overtake you as a thief. Right? And then it goes on in children of the day, children of the night, etc., etc. But look at verse 9. It says, verse 8 and 9, it says, "But let us who are of the day be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith and love, and for a helmet the hope of salvation. For God has not appointed us to wrath, but to obtain salvation for our Lord Jesus Christ." So the wrath in context is talking about the day of the Lord on the unbelievers here. And the salvation is talking about is in verse 10, who died for us, so that whether we wake or sleep, we should live together with them. That's that resurrection language in 1 Thessalonians 4. So what this is saying is that believers will not endure the wrath of the tribulation, but they will instead be resurrected before then, so they won't have to go through it. So to me,
Yeah.
this is pretty clear.
Yeah, I remember like when I first came into the faith, like I was like hearing these and I just really didn't make a decision because I'm like, yo, I barely can keep up because this is just exposition and I just, just trying to understand the basic
Right.
stuff. But I knew like this was a very tricky thing to accept because even though I did not have any biblical knowledge, I only could like use some things that I've read so far. And I kind of had a tough time accepting this view because like most people often cite the Israelites as an example of like, see, the Israelites were in Egypt when God poured out his wrath, which isn't entirely accurate because they were residing in a town outside of Egypt. So even though Egypt was getting judged for what they were doing with the Israelites weren't living in Egypt itself. You can read that in Genesis where they inherited the land out of the, what is it called? I think he's still known as king or pharaoh. I don't remember, but he basically gave them a piece of the land reserved for the Israelites, and only for the Israelites. So that explained, that couldn't be farthest from the truth. And then another thing would be, of course, like Genesis 18 where God and 19, where God is judging Sodom and Gomorrah, and even though there was righteous people, he couldn't judge them. The believers from the unbelievers, so he has to remove them. I'm sorry, the righteous from the wicked, of course. So then he did remove it, and then he just solely judged the wicked. I have like two instances within the Old Testament that's accurately portrayed. It seems like God doesn't judge two different kinds of people with the same measure of judgment. That would just show that he is unjust or impartial. However, I do see that God is separating two distinct groups, and we'll just stick with believers and unbelievers, and he's judging them according to what they are. So,
Yeah.
I really don't see post trib as a view, and also like what would be the point? Like imagine somehow miraculously living to see the seventh year of the trib and then getting raptured. What would be even the point when you already went through it all? You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, and also look at, and again, this doesn't fit with 1 Thessalonians 4, because this is the key rapture text. It says, "But I would not have you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning those who are asleep."
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, we'll say, well, what does asleep mean? Well, we'll get to it. "That you do not sorrow, even as others which have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, now that's against the crossless gospel, as we all know.
Christ's gospel.
Even
Right.
so, them which also sleep in Jesus, God will bring with them. For this we say unto you by the word of the Lord, that the we which are alive and remain at the coming of the Lord will not prevent those who are asleep. For the Lord shall descend from heaven with a shout, and the voice of the archangel, and the trump of God, and the dead in Christ. So the dead in Christ refers to those who are asleep in this context.
Yeah.
Shall be first. And again, remember this audience when we're looking at other views. The dead in Christ, the resurrection happens first, and then it says, then we which are alive remain. So first the resurrection, then the rapture shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. Therefore comfort one another with these words. Remember, this can't be a comfort if unironically you have to go through 7 years of actual hell on earth and maybe have like a 10% chance at best of making it. See, a lot of these post-trib people, pre-wrath, they really think that, oh, I'm gonna make it through. I'm gonna make it through the judgments. I'm gonna get through everything.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
be the one, and I'm gonna get my gold and my guns and my beer and my woman, and I'm gonna hide in my bunker. And it doesn't work like that. And look, we have drones, we have missiles. If the government wants to, they can snap their fingers, push a button, take you out immediately. You're not surviving the tribulation, bro, if you're in them. 90%
You're gonna
chance.
be honest. Yeah.
It wouldn't be a comfort at all if Paul. It wouldn't be a comfort at all if Paul is unironically saying, "But you have to go through 7 years of hell first to get to it." Now that would literally contradict what the verse is communicating. And then even we see in 2 Thessalonians 2 that the Thessalonian believers were shooken up because they thought the day of the Lord has already come. Well, why would they be shaken up about the day of the Lord coming if Paul already taught them, don't worry, you're going to be in the tribulation before then? No, that wouldn't make sense. It would only make sense if he taught them, no, you're not going to be in the tribulation before then. You're not going to be in that time period, which is why they're worrying about it. Okay, otherwise it would just be normal.
Wait, I just realized because we already spoke about preterism, so they also don't believe in 7 years, right?
Preterists, not really, not the way that you think of it.
And none of the other views that we talked so far, they don't believe in 7 years either.
Millennialism, yeah, they don't. Generally speaking, they don't believe in a 7 year tribulation period.
Okay, so then you have to disregard a lot of like these eschatological like terms and meanings in order to come with this view. That's very interesting because I just now realizing it. Well, that takes care of that. So I guess preacher P-Mill is seeming the correct view on it so far, biblically speaking. I guess this is one of the things that really bothered me of people taking this view because like even though I watch certain individuals that help my understanding, unfortunately they take this view where getting caught up in the air is not a text of rapture. So I have my thoughts on it and I'll explain quickly. So I don't know if you can accentuate or add onto it. They say being caught up into the air means like we meet up with God halfway point. Like we start slowly ascending or whatever that is, and then Jesus starts descending, and so we meet him at a halfway point, right? In quotations, and then that's what we're doing. We're just like, okay, we want to reach out a destination and be together, so we're gonna allocate this specific place, but really it's just going up in the air somehow, which I don't understand. That's what it means when we're being met up. So instead of being caught up in the air, we're just meeting him halfway point. So I guess like the passages I can quote that just completely dismantles this is that in books like Hosea and other instances where there is like a prelude to rapture, they always have this idea that at some point at some time God will heal us, bind us, and we'll be together with the Lord. It even gives like a time where it says 2 days and then 3 days, so you can pair that up with what it could allude to. So and it could be as subtle, because I think Creation Week it kind of hints towards that as well. I'm not gonna get too much into it, but I'm pretty sure that that at one point in time, which is what we're talking about, we will be meeting up with God because He has to pour out His wrath. We can't be on the earth because that's appointed for the wicked, which we're no longer considered as. It's pretty clear in the Old Testament. It's even elaborated more on the New Testament. So how come denying the rapture doesn't work?
Yeah, I would say the reason why denying the rapture doesn't work is because, again, we just read the key text for it. It says, first the dead in Christ will rise. So again, that word rise, it's key resurrection language.
Yeah.
So we already have this implication of a resurrection taking place. People that are dead are now physically alive. Okay. However, this is important. The rapture is not that, because it says, then we which are alive shall be caught up. So that's not, so to be alive and remaining, you're not physically dead. You're alive. You're going to be, you're caught up, and you're going to be in the clouds. Now, whether you think that's physical clouds, whether you think that's another dimension, the point is that you're not on the earth anymore. You are with Jesus now, and you didn't die because you are alive and remain. So I think that clearly this does show that you have believers that will resurrect, but what you're experiencing is not a resurrection, it's a transformation. Like it says in 1 Corinthians 15 as well, and which details more about the resurrection bodies and stuff like that. So I think that the rapture, just from this text alone, has to be true, but you even see that in other texts, like Revelation. I would say another key text is Revelation chapter 3, which says, Revelation chapter 3. Revelation 3, verse 9 and 10. This is also, again, another key text for pre-trib. And again, I know we're talking about pre-trib, but I think they go well together. It says, behold, I will make them which are of the synagogue of Satan, which say they are Jews and are not, but do lie. And behold, I will make them to come and worship before your feet, and to know that you have loved me. Because you have kept the word of my patience, I will also keep you from the hour of temptation, which shall come upon the whole world to try those who dwell upon the earth. So again, we have a time of testing, a time of temptation, which we know in the later book of Revelation, the hour that the temptation it's facing all upon the whole world is obvious, which is to dwell on the earth, the unbelievers. So this is clearly the tribulation period, 7-year period, a time and a half, times, etc. It says it appears conditional. We'll get to that, right? Mm-hmm. So it says, but it says, I will keep you from the hour of temptation, as in I will keep you from the hour of temptation. Keep you out from, tereo ek in the Greek, means to be taken out from, to be abstained from, which we see in Acts chapter 15, John chapter 17, to be kept from the devil, because obviously we're not in the devil, we're in Christ. And it's the word of, and it's the hour of temptation. See, you're not just kept through the temptation itself, the tribulation, right? You're kept out from the time period itself. You're not there. That's what that. Mm-hmm. And again, it shall come upon the whole world. So this is not so again, what the predators want to say is they want to say this is a localized thing. It's a localized period. It's only in Jerusalem. Well, the text doesn't allow that because it comes upon the whole world, right? And now, of course, what Crab said is it appears conditional. This is where grammatical sort of understanding and literary devices function, because when Jesus says, "You have kept the word of my patience," because you have kept the word of my patience, right? He's not really giving a reason for why they're going to. First of all, it's not exactly clear if the "you have kept the word of my patience" refers to the next line, which is "I will keep you from the hour of temptation." A lot of people argue that it actually refers to the previous line, which is, I will make them low before your feet and come to worship you, right? So a lot of people argue that it refers to that. But even if it did refer to the next line, it doesn't actually follow. Because you see in Revelation 3, right, verses 7 to 8, it says, I know your works, and I have set before you an open door, and that no man can shut it. For, so it's the same Greek word, because you have a little strength and you have kept my word and have not denied my name. But see, he's not actually recognizing the reason he's going to open a door for them, right? He's not recognizing the reason he's going to open a door for them. The reason he's going to open a door for them is so that he can obviously glorify his name and they can evangelize and stuff. But he's recognizing their need for it, right? He's recognizing their faithfulness in this period of testing. And so when he says, because you've kept the word of my patience, he's recognizing their faithfulness amidst pursuits, and he's giving them a promise to give them hope, right? So basically, the reason that they're getting this promise is because they've endured so much, so that they can have the hope to continue on. And I think that's the better reading of it, because again, I don't think this verse can be taken as conditional, because all believers, as we know in 1 Thessalonians 4, will be raptured. So it wouldn't make sense for this to be conditional.
He's leading up to a specific explanation as to why that is. It's not really like justifying like this needs to happen in order for it. Like I get it, and that makes sense.
Right.
Okay, what else have we missed out? I feel like we're missing something else. Oh yeah, so he keeps saying pre-wrath. So is pre-wrath another way of saying was it post-trib? Because I think I caught you like interchangeably using it.
So the most common way of articulating pre-wrath, and definitely Crab knows this more, and he can type it. The most common way of articulating pre-wrath is post-trib pre-wrath, and I say this honestly, it's very convoluted. There's many books on it. It was mostly propagated by Marvin Rosenthal and I think others, and Steven Anderson and the NIFB are most like adamant about it, and people like Donnie Badinsky on his channel Standing for Truth also advocate for it very heavily and aggressively. People like Alan Kirshner also advocate for it. So there's a lot of people that advocate for post-trib pre-wrath, and of course they think they found something in the text, and they compare Matthew 24 and Revelation 6, and essentially what the claim is they'll argue that the rapture happens around, and again, this is me being honest, they won't say that this is what they are, but it happens around 3/4 mark of the tribulation. So around like 5.2 years into the tribulation, you're going to get raptured. So it's after the midpoint, before the end point, somewhere in the middle there, you're going to get raptured. And that's before the wrath of God begins. And so the reason for this view is because they see in Revelation 6 where it says the wrath of the Lamb has come. They think that's talking about, it's going to come in the future.
Okay. So after all the things they have read up until that point, wrath wasn't expanded upon until they saw that. That's horrible, but okay, I follow you.
Exactly. So they argue that the sixth seal, that's when the wrath begins, or somewhere some say sixth or fifth, it depends. Again, very different views within it. But then they say the wrath doesn't begin until the sixth or so seal, and then that's when the believers are raptured out. Now, again, many problems with this view, many problems, but that's one of the main ones.
Wow, that's horrible. That's I would say, okay, so it's definitely, I would say, inaccurate just as much as preterism, but it's a really bad exegete of like grabbing the text and somehow situating the wrath of God instead of being within the 7 years into a much more confined time within those 7 years. I find that very ridiculous. So all those passages about the hour of temptation, they were never about 7 years. It was what, like 2.3? Am I understanding that right?
Something like that. Yeah, like it again, they interpret different passages differently. They say they have great tribulation and tribulation, which technically speaking, they think great tribulation refers to the 2.5 or so something years, when in reality, the great tribulation refers to the second half of the tribulation, I would argue.
That's weird.
And so The main problem with their view, there's two main problems. In order to get their view, you have to have a trifold split of revelation, of the time periods. So consistently in the Bible, it's always referred to as 3.5 years and then 3.5 years, a
Right.
time, half a time. What they have to do is they have to say that after the midpoint, right after the midpoint of after 3.5 years, there's a certain period of the Antichrist reign that the believers go through, that little sliver, and that is another separation of the tribulation. And then after that point, then you have the other split, which is the wrath of God. So you have the tribulation, Antichrist reign, and then the wrath of God, right? At the little sliver at the end. The problem is the text doesn't allow this. Daniel 12 is clear. The Antichrist reigns for a time, times, and half a time. The Antichrist makes a covenant and breaks it after a time, times, half a time in the midst of the week. You only have 2 separations in the 7 years, not 3.
Mm-hmm.
And the second view, why this can't be true, is because look at Revelation chapter 6. It says there's martyrs, and their souls go up to be with Jesus. And they're waiting for when he vindicates their death and their blood upon the earth, which is the second coming. The problem with this is in Revelation chapter 7, the next chapter, you have these same people that are martyred. They're with their white garments and they're waiting to be resurrected. And you see these exact same people in Revelation 14 that are on the earth, the tribulation believers. They have not kept his name and not taken the mark of the beast and kept the faith. And then you have the climax in Revelation 20 when they're vindicated and they finally get resurrected after the tribulation. See, what the pre-wrath has to do, and again, listen closely, what the pre-wrath has to do is it has to say that there's a resurrection at the rapture, right, around 5-something years, and then there's a second resurrection, right after the tribulation. But this description of the people after the tribulation is the exact same description of the people that were killed before in the tribulation period.
Yeah, okay. It seems very convoluted. I see what you're saying now.
So it's really good because, again, remember what I showed in 1 Thessalonians 4. You have to have a resurrection first of dead believers, and then you have the rapture. So you have you have the rapture event. So again, here's the timeline. You have the tribulation period and then the rapture, right? With Jesus coming back in the pre-wrath rapture. And then you have Jesus coming back again after the 7 years and resurrecting a separate group of people. But the problem is, who is this second group of people that he's resurrecting? Because it gives the exact same description of these people as the same exact people in Revelation 6, which did not take the mark of the beast. So I think that just on that alone, pre-wrath can't be true. You know? Those 2 points alone, pre-wrath can't be true.
Yeah. Okay. It seems like a very dismissible thing because, like, it really hones down on, like, if this happened, it can't be the case because the prerequisites for we know that these things taking place haven't met those conditions, therefore it can't be true. I see that. All right. I think that's... Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Well, isn't there one more you could add, which is partial rapture?
Partial rapture? I've never heard of that one. What is that?
So I think, honestly, so I would, from what we've seen so far, I would put preterism in its own tier, F tier. But I think even partial rapture goes with F tier, honestly.
Okay,
because
I'm with you on that. I just want to know what is partial rapture because it sounds like a doozy.
Rapture is this belief that the rapture is only for faithful Christians. So if you're a carnal Christian, if you're not faithful to Christ, if you're not obedient to Christ, if you're not fighting against sin, then you won't experience the rapture. You're going to go through the tribulation, and in fact, you only get raptured after you reach a certain level of sanctification and holiness. And so what it eventually is that the rapture of the church becomes a reward for believers, not a gift.
Wow. So this is like works-based Catholicism just creeping up again.
Right, exactly. Like a lot of people in the 1800s, Robert Gouvet, Watchman Nee, Witness Lee, they took this partial rapture view. Um, and now again, it's very rare today. Some people just deny the rapture altogether, but there are some people that are very works based. They want to say that they're free grace, but these people deny that the rapture is an actual gift for believers simply by being in Christ. So and again, the what destroys this view, if you look at it, 1 Corinthians 15:51 to 52, it says, "Behold, I will show you a mystery," right? We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. In the moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trump. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. Look at what it says. It says, we shall all be changed, okay, in the twinkling of an eye, which as we know, is the resurrection rapture event, right? And again, who's the all changed? Look at 1 Corinthians 12. We are all baptized by one spirit into one body. That's the body of Christ. You see in 1 Corinthians, it consistently talks about believers, people that are sinning, people going to law against brother, people committing sexual immorality, people abusing spiritual gifts, doing all of these terrible activities. And yet Paul says they're all going to be raptured. So if Paul says they're all going to be raptured, if Paul says they're all going to be changed in the twinkling of an eye, who are we to say that, well, no, but if you're too sinful, you won't experience the rapture. You won't experience, the coming of Christ and the judgment seat of Christ. No, that's completely wrong. Okay, because we know that Paul didn't consider the rapture as a reward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he doesn't really present it as such. Like, is there like a text to be like, oh, I can see where you're coming from, or that's just assumed?
Yeah, I would say, like again, there's very few texts, but they'll go to like Hebrews chapter 9, verse 28. That's one, and of course we talked about Revelation 3 already. That's a key text they use. But in Hebrews 9:28, it says, "So Christ was once offered to bear the sins of many, and to those who look for him shall he appear the second time without sin unto salvation." So here they'll say, oh, you have to look for Christ. You have to eagerly expect him and love his appearing, so that you can eventually get the salvation. And even 2 Timothy 4:7-8 says, "I have fought a good fight. I have finished the course. I have kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous, is appearing." It's only those who love his appearing, right? But the problem with this is, number one, Hebrews 9 doesn't just refer to resurrection. It doesn't just refer to being raptured or eternal salvation in that sense. Really, in salvation in the book of Hebrews is this. It's close. It includes positional. Don't get me wrong, but it definitely is also a reward idea, like the crown of righteousness. So when you're talking about salvation in the book of Hebrews, it's not just you get to heaven when you die. Yeah, that's included in it, but it's this full participation with Christ, being an heir of the kingdom, being a joint heir with Christ, a partner with Christ. So when you're talking about salvation in the book of Hebrews, you're not just talking about going to heaven or getting raptured. You're talking about broader than that. And so I think that Hebrews 9:28 doesn't prove that.
No.
Same with 2 Timothy. Yeah, in 2 Timothy 4, it's talking about a crown of righteousness. A crown, look at 2 Timothy 2. If we endure with him, which Paul said that he endured the faith, he endured the good fight. If we endure with him, we will reign. If we deny him, he will deny us. Well, he's not going to deny us the rapture. He's going to deny us reigning with Christ. So that's that crown idea. So you're not losing on your salvation, your rapture experience, if you're not faithful. You're losing on that reward you could have had for that faithful service.
Gotcha. Okay. So let's establish this tier list, because I think we talked about all these eschatological views. From S all the way to F, and then underneath F, we have preterism as its own tier, as the worst of the worst. Right? Let's work our way up, right? Starting with F, what belongs in this tier?
So yeah, if preterism is not included there, it's its own Z tier. Then I think after that partial rapture, it's just pure F. Just There's no reason to read it. It's just trash. Never believe that.
Okay. What about the D tier? The one above that one.
I would say the D tier includes the post. I would say D tier includes the post millennialism and the millennialism, because I think they're both in the same boat. They're confusing. They conflate categories. They're not consistent, right? And of course, they can't stand Revelation 20 and Zechariah 14.
What about pre-wrath? Doesn't belong in DRF.
Honestly, I think pre wrath belongs. I would say pre wrath belongs in like honestly honestly, I could see pre-wrath belonging in like C tier, it's owned like I would say like pre-wrath. I don't know because it's probably the worst, one of the worst Rapture views, but it's better than Partial Rapture, better than Amel. I'm gonna say that it belongs honestly it might belong in like C tier, like low C tier. Don't get me wrong.
All right. What else in C tier? Just that.
I would say C tier. I think above C tier is pre-mill, obviously, because it's above that, so it's pre-mill. You know, you're the best millennial view, better than post, definitely better than preterism. And so I think those two, pre-mill and pre-wrath, belong in C tier, right? Um, and honestly, I think that post-trib. And again, people are going to be like, what? What are you saying? Post trib? Yeah, I think post trib, in all fairness, I think because it's so popular, because of the fact that it's at least better than pre wrath, because it actually, okay, I can see where you're coming with that. And it's not this confusing nonsense. I think post trib is maybe a B tier. Like, it's like, hey, if you're post trib, I'm not going to say you're a heretic or anything like that. I'm not going to, I'm not going to be too angry with you. I just think you're just wrong, you know.
Okay.
And then pre-trib. Well, pre-trib is definitely pre-trib, pre-millennial. That's definitely A tier. But what's S tier though? Think about that.
Um, I guess there'll be like these like I don't know. Like I don't know if I made a new view, but you are very familiar with my view with the rapture, right? Where there is one in pre-trib, but it seems like there's another gathering. Like I wouldn't call that a rapture, but there is a gathering in post. Like I do see what they kind of see in post trib. Yeah, in post trib.
Right.
Before like the being in the wine press of God according to Revelation 14. But I think it's because it's the gathering of like those that are within the Great Tribulation according to Revelation 14 and 7 with a multitude, those that are coming out of the tribulation. So I do see that. I don't think it's that or the other. I think it's both. The question is, you know, when did they take place? But I don't see one negating over the other. So I don't know if we could put like a title on that. But I think that's an S tier because it definitely does acknowledge post trib, a pre trib rapture, and a post trib gathering.
Okay. Yeah. So and again, what Omni's saying is not that there's a second rapture, a second church, but that there's essentially, so you have one gathering, that's the resurrection of the believers, the catching up in the air, and you have a second gathering after the tribulation of believers, right before the unbelievers are cast into the lake of fire. You know, and so yeah, I think that view harmonizes well with Matthew 24, harmonizes with Isaiah 27, harmonizes with Revelation 14. So I think that view would be like that synthetic view. That view is probably better than any of the other views because you're acknowledging the strengths and the weaknesses of all of them. So I think that would be S tier.
Yeah, I don't think there's like another view that you can squeeze in there. You could probably invent one if you're just like full out a heretic, but with that particular view, like I do see a purpose in it because of course like if you because there's a lot of death happening within the 7 years, But towards the end, right? Once God is completely destroying everything on the earth, because he's going to establish a new earth, so he's basically recreating everything in his image and his likeness. Um, that point of you either aligning yourself with God and or against him, like that choice is becoming limited even within this time frame. So I understand from that perspective there has to be another gathering. Just to reconcile these two different views, there has to be a view that, tackles them both exegetically, and I do feel that. I don't know if you can do the same for the amillennialism, the post, and the pre, because like I don't think so. Um, it's actually kind of interesting. I don't really like. I know it's a thing and exists, and God has to reign with His creation, because it just thematically fits with Sabbath. He rests from all His work. One day, 1,000 years. Peter, 2 Peter 3:8 and stuff like that. So, I don't think there's reconciliation there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it. Because pre-wrath, I don't know. There's nothing that I can reconcile with that. Preterism, 100% no.
No, they're like like there's really like preterism is irredeemable. Like it's just it deserves to be hewn down. Like I've said this before. If a bad tree can't bear good fruit, a good tree can't bear bad fruit. I've never seen any good fruit from preterism. So what that means is that it needs to be hewn down, cut, and cast into the fire where it belongs. Okay,
Amen.
so that's what I feel about
Amen.
so.
Well, okay. I mean, you could kind of squeeze these in because they're not really end time views, but some people will make this point. What about annihilationism, right? Because they technically don't have an end, but how can they fit their view into the end times when you just become like a phone with a dead battery in a sense, and then you come back alive at a later time. So it's not really annihilationism. I don't know. It's kind of weird. Um,
Oh, okay. You mean soul sleep, right?
yeah. So because they don't all say this, but they say poof, you cease or you cease to exist, or and this is the other fringe group where like you just go and then like you got wake up and then get judged. So nothing happens. No punishment is being served until way later, and then you're casted into
Yeah.
the lake of fire, which
Yeah. So I would say with annihilationism, there's different views within it. It's not, you know, it's not exactly concrete. I think, well, I will say this. I think the belief that it's going to be like the medieval style Dante's Inferno, like your flesh coming out of your arms, and it's going to be like fire coming out of your eyes, and it's like going to be a kidney stone every day. I don't think that's
what the heck.
I don't think that's accurate to hell. Hell is called torment. It's not called torture, right? And so just being in hell itself is a punishment, just like being in prison is a punishment for your crime. You have limited access, no blessings from God. God, you're eternally condemned. You have no hope of salvation. That alone is enough to torment you, right? And there's
That's
degrees
weird.
of
So like
and
you being acknowledging and accepting your circumstance is not really punishment, but the gravity of the situation becoming
Right.
surreal is what you're trying to say.
Yeah. And
Mm.
so I will say now, of course, it's not just separation from God. Obviously, you are separated from God, you're condemned,
Yeah.
you have no hope of being redeemed, but you're not in eternal like it's not like you're being waterboarded forever, right? You're in a hot place. It's not comfortable, but it's tolerable, right? Because Jesus said it's more tolerable for other cities than for others, because they rejected Christ. So there's degrees of
Hmm.
tolerability there. I think Bob Wilkin talks about this in his book, 10 Most Misunderstood Words in the Bible. I recommend that. And so I think that hell and then the lake of fire, it's not going to be like what you see in Dante's Inferno. But I think that people do soften it by saying it's just like, oh, it's just nothing is there. It's no punishment at all. No, there is going to be punishment, but not torture. It's going to be justice. It's going to be righteous, and it's going to be vindication. So
That's super
Um,
interesting. I don't think I ever heard that. So I'm trying to grasp fully your difference or distinction between torture and torment. So,
right.
like when you're saying torture, is it like kind of like I don't know what
Yeah.
word to
So
describe this, but
yeah, you're talking about God inflicting pain onto other people eternally, right? God inflicting direct pain in very specific identified ways eternally. Whereas with torment, right, you can be tormented internally, you can be tormented by just the flames of being there, you can be tormented by guilt, you can be tormented by just
mm,
the fact that, like look at Luke 16 when it talks about the rich man and Lazarus. Whatever view you take of that, it's clearly talking about hell.
yeah,
And we have with Lazarus, Lazarus is not being tormented in hell. He can talk, he's sitting down, he's in flames, right? And but he can at least have a conversation with Lazarus. If his skin was being peeled off and he was on fire, I don't think that you could have that.
yeah,
Um, and so I think that that's just what hell and the lake of, again, not a good place to be in,
right,
but it's not intolerable.
okay. So I don't think I'm gonna bother with like how does hell look, and maybe they could do that in a separate video because I definitely am interested on that. But that seems like a more accurate rendition because torture seems like not an accurate view, but like the torment aspect actually like makes more sense because obviously like
Yeah.
they're paying the equivalence of like the damage they have done while rejecting God indefinitely. So you're getting what you deserve in all levels, meaning from here on forward forever. Because again, like every time God creates, it doesn't cease to exist. Therefore, it's either you exist with God or separate from God eternally. If you exist with God separately eternally, that means that you're paying for the things you have done against an eternal God. So I guess that makes sense because torture really doesn't imply justice being served, but torment, if somebody's getting tormented, there is some sense of justice being served there.
Yeah. So I would say now, of course, along with that is the soul sleep view. The soul sleep view is it's within a broader eschatological belief about the end times and other stuff. But I think soul sleep is just not biblical at all. So again, what you described, that people, they die, they're unconscious, and then they get resurrected for judgment. I think that that has many problems. I
Yeah, it
think the
does.
first problem conflicts with the text, right? Second Corinthians chapter 5, verse 4 to 5 is super clear, right? It says, "For we that are in this tabernacle," wait, no, sorry, it's not, it's a little bit later, but it's verses 6 to 8, right? It says, "Therefore we are always confident, knowing this, that while we are at home in the body, we are absent from the Lord." So one equals the other. If you're in the body physically, you're not with the Lord physically. Well, your consciousness. For we walk by faith, not by sight. We are confident, I say, and willing rather to be absent from the body and to be present with the Lord. So to be present with the Lord, right, in your consciousness, is to be absent from your physical body in terms of consciousness. So you are conscious with the Lord if you are not with your body, which means your soul separated from your
I
body. That's
got you.
physical death.
Yeah, that I
Right.
never thought of it like that. That's a really good proof text. Where like just because your body is inactive doesn't mean um, you cease operations. In this case, soul sleep. That makes sense. Yeah, I
Yeah,
always
and also,
those views always bother me because it's just like you can't really substantiate that. Like because I know I don't watch this guy, but he just keeps appearing to my feed. Messenger of Truth always perpetuates this thing, and I just find it so exhausting because he gets annoyed. Like, oh, come on, guys! Like, how do you not believe this? And this kind of like tone. Um, but I'm just like, can you like make it believable like at all? Because I'm looking at the text, I really don't see any inclination like the Old Testament. I know Crab brought up like Daniel 12 too, so even in the Old Testament they understood like there is hell in all in intents and purposes. How we imagine it today, it was somewhat similar to even back then. So it's really hard to come up with this fringe view otherwise.
yeah, no, and there's a lot of views like that. We can't account for every eschatological view. If you do have one that we haven't covered here, in some depth or mentioned, and you're, I don't know, like some little season theory type, universalist or whatever, like if reincarnation, or Hebrew Israelite, just say it and just say, hey, I disagree, and then I won't read the comment because I don't care.
Okay,
But you
all
can
right.
definitely uh,
We
you
could
can definitely say your.
we could definitely revisit because like what's another thing we can do like other um I wouldn't count these as like Christian views, but like let's say other non Christians their view on the end times because they are wild. Like Hebrew Israelites
Right.
think that they're gonna start enslaving anybody who's not. Before it was black, now it's just people of color. Um, so we could probably visit that. If not, we could just talk about hell next time.
Right. Yeah, no, that's definitely a good plan.
All right, there you go. All right, I just finished the stream. That was good. That was almost 2 hours. Pretty
Oh,
good.
that was beneficial. Crab, well, I mean, Crab has been in the audience. Come, come inside. It's fun inside. What is it? Invite sent.
I'm surprised that the Herbulites didn't come in.
I'm here. Hello.
Yeah, correct. Crab is here now. Yeah, So how did you feel about the stream?
I mean, it was comprehensive, so you covered everything. I assume there's a lot more to the preterism. I hopped in when you were talking about that, so.
Yeah, no. There was like we talked about preterism probably, and it always kept coming up because it's just like it was in a tier of its own. Like it's just it's trash. It can't survive. It has nothing to support itself. It's so heretical. It's worse than partial rapture. It's the worst eschatological view ever. Um, it deserves to be cut down and cast into
Well,
hell.
you might have alienated your audience. I don't know.
Oh, well, yeah, definitely. Well, I alienated the 2% of viewers that believe Jesus is not good. Yeah, of course, bro. Yeah.
Um,
I mean, look, do I seek to please man or please Christ?
Ooh, got him.
well, I didn't know. Do you have like an actual like graphic of the tier list? That would have been cool.
No, I did, but like I kept like clicking on other things to check on the stream because I only have one screen on me, so it kept showing up like other things. So I found that annoying. So I'm like, all right, let me like not come off as an unprofessional and let me just
Right.
do it separately. What I could do, because like I recorded all